You're tuned to Good Morning Scotland with Laura Maxwell and Graham Stewart. For years, much of Scotland's bus network has been in decline, with fewer buses on fewer routes. The end result? Fewer passengers can take the bus to work, college or the shops. Well, just over a month from now, new powers will allow Scotland's transport authorities to change the way that buses are run. So could this mean the introduction of publicly controlled bus networks, similar to those in London and Manchester? Well, our transport correspondent David Henderson joins us now. So David, these new powers are coming. Is there a case for change?
Well, Graham, by almost any measure, most of Scotland's bus network is struggling. If you look at Scotland's biggest transport region, Strathclyde, for example, you can see the problem there. Bus use has plummeted by 32% in a decade. That's 70 million fewer bus journeys over that 10-year period. The bus network there is shrinking. Bus services are less frequent, and bus fares have risen even faster than the cost of living. They went up by 25% in real terms over a decade. So by all of those measures, the bus network is failing. And by the way, those key points are not made by opponents of the current system. They're made by SPT, the body that's in charge of the bus network in Strathclyde. They know there's a problem and they think change has to happen. And now that change is possible because powers are being given by the Scottish Parliament, by the Scottish Government in just over a month to transport authorities around Scotland to allow that to happen. It's prompted a report published this morning by the Centre for Cities think tank. It claims that improving bus services could bring a big boost to Glasgow's prosperity, to jobs there and in surrounding areas. Now, the study's been paid for by the Get Glasgow Moving campaign, which backs public control of the city's bus network. The study warns that Glasgow doesn't fare well compared with large European rivals, in part because the transport network just doesn't reach as far as it could. Here's Paul Swinney from the Centre for Cities.
So new legislation that has been passed allows buses to be taken back under a degree of public control. Now, this has been the case in London for many, many decades. Manchester and Liverpool are now taking steps in that direction too. And we think by having greater control over the bus network, it allows us to set routes so they serve people better. And it also allows us to integrate the buses better with the subway and with trains too. So you have a public transport network which acts much more seamlessly than is the case, which means that it's easy to use, better connects people, and hopefully helps improve the economy as a result.
So, David, you now have officials at SPT in the west of Scotland and doubtless at other authorities now weighing up their options, looking to change the way that buses are run. What might they choose to do?
Well, Graham, the current bus network in most of Scotland is deregulated. That means that bus operators can run a bus service on any route they choose, and no one can tell them which routes they can or can't operate on. It's complete freedom, in effect, for the operators. When it works, it brings lots of choice for passengers, but it also means those bus firms can pick and choose the routes that they operate on. So they're often accused of neglecting the quieter, less profitable routes and focusing on those profitable, busy routes. Now, to change all that, transport authorities could introduce a system like the one they have in Edinburgh, which seems to be bucking the trend. It seems to be avoiding decline. There, Lothian buses are owned and operated by the local councils, but that would involve enormous startup costs because that involves literally buying a fleet of buses costing many millions of pounds. The other option is what you might call the London option or the Manchester option. It's what's called a franchise system, which means authorities sign contracts with bus operators telling them which routes they have to serve. They'd get some profitable routes and some not so profitable routes. It's a bit like the way that Calmac ferry franchise works on Scotland's west coast, where there's cross-subsidy. We've been hearing from bus passengers in Greater Manchester, where that franchise system is being introduced, to find out what they make of this new system. Here's what they had to say.
Yeah, it's pretty reliable, to be honest. Yeah, I get the 36 or the 37 sometimes. So yeah, it's quite reliable.
Is it better than the system before?
Yeah, I'd say so. Yeah, because the more frequent, the more on time than the last ones. The last ones used to be late all the time, where these ones are more frequent.
I mean, it was on time. It was it was pleasant, and it was on time coming back. So I've just been to Salford Royal, you see. So I'm on my way to work now. So yeah, it was my experience today was really good, to be honest.
Is it a good idea generally, you think, taking the buses into council control? Because I suppose that's what it's all about.
Yeah, probably, yeah. I don't mind, as long as they're on time, I'm happy.
I found it really good. It's a lot better now that you can see the stops at the top. All the buses have changed and now there's more buttons you can press to get off the bus, so it's easier to get off the bus. And the new app as well, it's really good because you can get tram tickets and bus tickets at the same time, so it's a lot easier to use.
So the experiences there of the public in Greater Manchester, where they've brought the buses back into public control. But David, buses aren't funded as much as trains are funded. So can we really expect a world-class network without more money?
Well, it's a good question, Graham. And you're right to say funding per passenger mile is far lower on buses than it is on trains, for example. And I think that whatever plans are brought forward by SPT and other transport authorities around Scotland, plans for change, they will likely come with a price tag and a plea for funding, though, because there's startup costs to any changes and a cost which continues into the coming years. Now, SPT have set out their case for change. I outlined many of the problems they've set out, and next spring they will set out plans for what they want to improve the bus network across Strathclyde. They haven't decided what they'll do yet, but what's clear is that funding is likely to be a crucial part of that process if it's to be a success. Here's SPT's Chief Executive, Valerie Davidson.
So people talk about building new things, which is great, has to be welcome, but you have to build and service new things. That's the everyday costs. So how are we going to actually generate that income to actually provide the service that people want and need to get to hospital, education and the economy?
You will have been looking at the numbers closely. How much more money do you think is required in order to run a service at a level you think is right?
You say that, so I'm not going to preempt that.
Millions of pounds a year.
Millions of pounds. We already spend in Scotland not far off £500 million on public transport for bus. That's a lot of money, but it may well take more. So we need to understand what that is before we actually take ourselves into that commitment. But recognising that we do need to make a change. So it's how do we fund that?
So that's the boss of SPT, Valerie Davidson. So some hard choices lie ahead, and different parts of Scotland may require different kinds of bus provision, different bus services. But whatever the story, it's likely to prompt calls for more funding for buses, Graham.
OK, David, thank you for that. David Henderson there, our transport correspondent.